The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to this week's episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. As we all know, for managed service providers, there's increasingly, effort on targets from cyber criminals. A lot of times what's happening is that they're focused on MSPs being that powerful force multiplier. Recent attacks on CDK and Challenge Healthcare have highlighted the immense pressure upstream providers face, especially when the disruptions affect numerous downstream organizations. Now, by understanding the unique threats that MSPs encounter and learning how to better secure themselves, not only can they defend against the attacks, but they can also gain that competitive edge, that competitive advantage in securing new business for their MSP. So I want to dive into some of the critical issues. I want to explore some of the strategies for MSPs to fortify their defense and thrive in today's cyber landscape. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first guest here. I've got Chester Wisniewski, who is with Sophos. And let's go ahead and bring in Chester. And there we have Chester. How you doing today?
I'm having a great day. How are you today?
I'm doing awesome. It's a beautiful day here in Michigan, and cybersecurity is of course, a hot topic that we're always talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the security topics don't go away, and it amazes me the number of non-tech people who I now get messages over social media and things from. Did you hear about this? And did you see that? Because it's like intruding on everyone's life in one way or another. And as we're recording this, I think I got my Ticketmaster breach notice yesterday. I mean, we're all constantly being bombarded with our information, unfortunately being involuntarily shared by our partnerships with other organizations.
Exactly. And what I want to do is we start out, I'd like to have you give a little bit of background about your role at Sophos.
Sure. I'm the director and global field CTO, which doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but in essence, I've been at Sophos for about 21 years, and the vast majority of that time I've been in the research side looking at threats and the threat landscape and malware and how cyber criminals operate and all that type of thing. And currently I lead a small team of people that we're kind of the interface between all that research arm that looks into all these threats and behaviors and figures out who on the outside of Sophos can consume that information and take advantage of it to better defend ourselves, our country, whatever purposes are out there. So we sort of liaise between the 500-ish researchers that we have internal to Sophos, and then provide that information that we get from that research with law enforcement, with national security organizations, with channel partners and managed service providers, with the press, anybody that we think can consume that knowledge that we've learned about all those threats and turn it into better protection to defend ourselves and our networks.
Absolutely. And it's so important for us to be in this role. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I don't think, when I first got into IT, when I chose to get into IT, that I knew that it would be such a critical role that we play in the day-to-day battle of securing, not only SMBs, enterprise, but like you said, our country. It's just that constant battle. With that being said, what are some of the most common methods that criminals use to compromise the victim networks?
Well, it all comes back to basics. I mean, we could be having this conversation when I started at Sophos 21 years ago, and it wouldn't be that different than the conversation we'll have today, unfortunately, which is, about 80% of the breaches that we look into with our rapid response service. It's about half and half stolen credentials and unpatched network-facing devices, right? It's firewalls and routers and VPN concentrators, and it doesn't matter what it is. If it's there for an authorized use to gain entry to the network, it will also be abused for unauthorized access.
Sure.
if those things aren't patched and fixed. And then if those things are properly maintained, then they're phishing people for passwords and looking for services that don't have multi-factor enabled. And that's, like I say, I mean, probably over 80% of incidents start in one of those two ways, and it's nothing
Yeah.
fancier than that.
Yeah. And I think, I think it's many things are taken for granted, as an organization, is making investments into their technology. Often they feel as, okay, I've bought, all the network infrastructure, I've bought all the computing devices, I've got this in place, and so we're good to go. And there's just so much more that goes along with that ongoing support, that's critical. And I think sometimes it's overlooked. They don't feel, especially in SMBs, don't feel that, bad actors really care about their, what's going to happen to them. Their business, they're too small. They don't have anything of value, but that's just so far from the truth, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I mean, obviously it sounds self-serving to talk about it because I'm in security and we're selling security services, but the reality
Yeah.
is every organization is valuable in multiple ways. And I think it's becoming more obvious that rather than robbing you or I and emptying our savings account of, say, $3,000 or $4,000, it's much more. Any small business is going to have tens of thousands of dollars in the accounts for payroll on Friday or on the 15th or whenever those types
Yeah.
of things. So even at a small level, you think about it, even if you're just a petty thief online, there's obviously a much larger sum of cash available to you to extort for or to steal in any organization than compared to an
Yeah.
individual. But then on top of that, even nation states are more and more interested in small organizations. So some of your listeners may have seen some of the headlines in the last few months coming out of the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, the security group within Department of Homeland Security for cybersecurity, talking about a group called Volt Typhoon. And Volt Typhoon is alleged to be a Chinese-based operation that we think might be in preparation for a potential invasion of Taiwan in the future. And what's interesting about Volt Typhoon is they don't really care who you are. They're using your network as a hopping off point to obfuscate the origins of their attacks. And they're also using it as a potential disruptive thing for a future during a future attack. And so even small businesses are useful to nation states when they're being used to distract from the real origin of an attack. If they can use your firewall to attack another victim rather than having an IP address coming in from China, then that's useful to them. And even if you're running a chain of pizzerias or flower shops, shutting down your network and causing public disruption during another type of an event, like an invasion of another country, just causes more chaos, right? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
that you're not making airplanes or missiles. What it means is you're causing a disruption to the economy, and everybody small business plays such an important role in the economy that it's certainly an interesting target even to nation states.
Yeah, and I mean, in two, let's take a look at CDK. I just recently bought a new vehicle at a GMC truck dealership, and it was just before that occurred. But speaking with them actually just in the last couple hours about some things that we're working through with them, they talked about the fact that just how much it impacted them, how the finance director I was just speaking to said she has been in the business long enough that she's glad that she remembers how to do things with paper and pen.
Yeah.
Because she said everything was down, and she says yeah, while things are back up, and they're continuing to move along with CDK. Many of the integrations are still not in place yet. So, for example, license plates. She said, like with the state of Michigan, they don't have that integration with CDK in the state of Michigan or the Secretary of State. And she said, so we're still battling the impacts of that, and so much time has passed already. So.
Yeah, I guess things have changed a lot over the years. I grew up in Michigan, and when I was a teenager, one of my jobs was for a local Chevy dealer, and my job was to take a thick envelope full of paperwork every day to the Secretary of State's office and go pick up the plates and stickers and bring them back. So
Yeah.
I guess we've reverted back to what I was doing almost 40 years ago.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think now they have an inventory of plates there at the dealerships, and they have access to the system to be able to do that, and hand you a plate right there on the spot, and it's impacted their ability to do that. There's just so many aspects that it's not just one component, all the, I guess, downstream aspects of, an outage like that or an attack like that is substantial.
Yeah, and I think it's really, we use that example in the introduction just because it's really important for MSPs to understand what an important role in that supply chain they are, right? They're very similar to that CDK kind of role in that these
Right.
smaller mid-sized businesses everywhere are really reliant on them. And as a result, I think they're actually getting an improved experience. I mean, it's like the knife edge balance thing for organizations. Like for small businesses to secure themselves is almost impossible. They need help. And so they've chosen to partner with organizations that can provide them with a far better security outcome in general. But they're also very dependent on them as this important link, right? And so you have extra responsibility. And I think CDK is unfortunately demonstrating, I'm sure that they'll lose business over this in the end, when a lot of those customers that have been impacted by this are going to look back and go, now when I'm reevaluating, do their competitors appear to have stronger security programs? I'm concerned about what happened. Or maybe you take the airline approach and you go, well, they just had a crash, now they'll be safe.
Right.
They just had their breach, maybe they're going to harden all their systems, and maybe now they're going to be the one to choose. I mean, I'm not recommending people who they should choose as an auto dealership as their service provider. But those kinds of things are things that we can use as competitive differentiators, because I think when you're one of those important links in the chain that when you break, it has all these knock-on effects to hundreds or maybe thousands of other organizations. It's something that more and more organizations are starting to second guess. They're like, should I be outsourcing this? Should I be partnering, or should I just do it myself? Because I don't want to be one of those organizations that is impacted by a situation like happened with CDK. And I think this is our opportunity to make sure that we do have our own secure house in order, and then use that as a promotional tool to say, like, when you're evaluating vendors, you need to make sure that if you're putting all your eggs in that basket to run your organization, that you're choosing the organization that is an A+ in that category, right? Because these types
Right.
of cyber attacks are specifically targeting these supply chain weaknesses, because they know it makes for better extortion, right? I mean, the criminals are just trying to extort cash, and if they can
Yeah.
impact 100 companies at once, it gives them a pretty strong lever to demand a high ransom.
Yeah, and I think a way that an MSP can differentiate themselves from their competition is to not take for granted what they do in the services they provide. I think often you think, okay, we're just resolving a printer issue, or we're providing some like level of security for them. I mean, it is so much more than that, right? I mean, even as simple as we talked about on a call today. Where that printer issue that you're fixing, that you might be thinking is no big deal, could be allowing them to print out a proposal for $1 million opportunity for that organization, that if they can't get it delivered and turned in for an RFP responsibility or RFP type of scenario, it could allow them to lose that business. So much more on the cybersecurity side. So much of what we do is going to help protect and keep that business running. It helps to keep those employees, keep putting food on their table. And it just has such a large economic impact that's so much greater than the business itself.
Oh yeah, and having worked at some large manufacturers in the past, I worked for a Fortune 500 for a while doing some consulting, and like, without a printer to print out a barcode on an assembly line, nobody in that factory works. Like, you
Right.
might think you can operate the machines without a computer. Sure, you can. But if you don't know what you're making, then nothing gets made. And if you don't know what to load on the truck, nothing gets loaded on the truck. I mean, it's, we're all so dependent on these technologies now to operate every single part of our business. I have a friend who his wife works at a law firm, and they had an attack that disabled their access to Dropbox. It's like, well, now you've got lawyers that bill at $500 an hour sitting around twiddling their thumbs, because if they don't have the ability to share documents with their clients and they can't retrieve the files being shared with them that they need to use to investigate the cases they're working on, they're just standing around, right? Like, I mean, we're all hyper dependent on this stuff, and I mean, it seems obvious to us, but I think what we're learning in America through some of these big scale breaches like Change Healthcare and CDK is there's all these hidden things that we didn't know were there that suddenly can disrupt stuff. Or maybe a couple years back when, Colonial Pipeline got ransomed and people couldn't get gasoline in the Southeast US, or JBS meats, and suddenly you couldn't buy pork at Costco, and like, who's this company? I've never heard of this company. It's like, well, now right? We're all so interconnected, and I guess with you being in Michigan, it's something that we always think about the auto companies. We know what just-in-time delivery and how the strikes disrupt supply chains, but most of the country doesn't think about those things, and those things now exist in everything. It's not just cars. It's getting meat and getting fuel and getting energy and getting toys and getting stuff from China in the Walmart.
Yeah. I mean, and we know that bad actors, they want to, cause disruption. They want to profit. And it seems like these criminals are winning the war. Are they ultimately?
Well, they're certainly getting away with a lot of money. I'll tell you that. I mean, I'm working on a new report we're just about to release on state of ransomware in manufacturing, which is why I have my mind on manufacturing. And I was just looking at the stats before we started recording, and 61% of the companies that are ransomware and in manufacturing are paying the ransom. So criminals are clearly, when more than half of organizations are paying the ransoms, they're not going to stop when they can steal an average of, $1.5–2 million per victim, and more than half the victims are paying. It's like, that's just a lot of cash, and it's not, as long as that train's rolling down the tracks, it's going to be hard to stop it. Now, the good news is, partnering with law enforcement and a lot of international policing organizations, I think we're starting to figure out how to make progress in this. I don't know that we're winning the war yet, but we're certainly starting to win some battles. And because we can't put many of these people in prison, we have to think of other approaches. And certainly in the last year, the FBI and the NCSC in the United Kingdom and a few other organizations have realized, like, disrupting the ability for these criminals to operate is probably more effective than worrying about trying to name them and shame them and put them in prison. And so we're starting to get our act together on the defensive side, certainly at a national level, but we all have a role to play in it. I mean, one of the guys on my team always uses the term, you need to participate in your own rescue. Like, you can't just stand back and not do anything to defend yourselves and then complain when you have a breach. I mean, we all have alarm systems and locks on our doors at our businesses and those types of things. And there are certain minimum basics that we need to take personal responsibility for, and then expect, hopefully, law enforcement to play their role as a deterrent as well. And if those two things start coming together better, we'll get there.
So when we take a look at cybersecurity, what should the key goals of a modern cybersecurity program be? What should that look like?
Well, I think certainly, again, in smaller organizations, we have an overemphasis on prevention, and we all want to prevent. Like, there's no doubt. Like, and I got my vaccine because I really didn't want to get COVID. I don't know if it's going to be 100% effective, but I'll take a chance, and at least maybe it helps me not get sicker. And I think we have to look at the security landscape similarly, which is the things that we're going to do on the prevention side are unlikely to be 100% effective, but we should still do them to try to lower our risk. But then what I think we're not doing a very good job at below the enterprise level is putting enough of an emphasis on detection and response, right? Because we know the prevention is going to maybe prevent 90% of the attacks. But the other 10%, we have to be ready with a plan to detect them as quickly as we can, because the longer they go on, the more expensive and costly and damaging they are to the organization, right? And so, the real important thing is that we improve our ability to detect and respond, because I don't think we're putting enough emphasis on that. We're putting too many of our eggs in the prevention basket, and we're not necessarily actively monitoring to be able to respond quickly. So, in a lot of cases, these attacks, when they get their initial foothold, it takes the criminals somewhere between 5 and 30 hours to start like mapping out your network and figuring out where your valuables are that they want to steal, or how they're going to get administrative access, or these types of things. And so that's a really critical window where somebody's smashed their hand through the glass, the alarm went off, somebody's in the network, but you can't wait days or weeks in order to respond to that kind of incident. You really need to get on early detection and early response, because if you can nip it in the bud at that point, the costs are very, quite low, and you learn how they got in and you do something to prevent it. You go patch the hole and you move on. But if you're not prepared to detect it early, it really can get out of control quickly, and these incidents are getting quite expensive. I think the median incident in our most recent survey is around $1.5 million for the cost of that incident. And that's not counting like paying ransoms or anything. That's just like lost business, lost productivity, rebuilding the servers, and new Active Directory, finding the backup tapes, all the things that have to go into these attacks. So the detection and response part is where we have a lot more work to do, I think. And this is where MSPs and MDR providers really have a big role to play, because I think the organizations themselves kind of look at a security alert and they go, oh, it detected something, great, the incident's over. And it needs to be more like, no, I detected something, now the investigation begins.
Yeah, and I would you say that there's an overemphasis or maybe a misconception that when there is a breach, typically, bad actors are sitting on that for, weeks or months, before they actually do the damage. I mean, I think a lot of people hear that, but that's not necessarily the case,
I'm going to say both things are true, which is that
Yeah.
often if it's stolen credentials, which is often the case, in those cases, sometimes they may have been stolen weeks or months ago, but because the criminal never used them, you don't have any indication that that incident's begun. So you're
Right.
sort of inventory sitting on the shelf, and you don't know that you're being sold as inventory for a criminal to come in later. So the first thing you notice from the time that you notice that somebody's now logged in with that stolen credential and started doing something, when the alarm bells start going off, it's definitely not weeks, it's generally hours, but before real bad things start happening. But it is true that sometimes you are sort of inventory sitting there for weeks and months. And
Right.
we've seen there's one incident we've been investigating in Southeast Asia lately that the indications are the criminals were in their network for 4 years doing stuff, and because they weren't responding to the alarms, they were able to kind of just wander around as long as they want and take what they needed. And that's obviously less than ideal, but in most cases, once an active attack has begun, it's usually within I want to say within 30 hours they've got full control of Active Directory in most cases. So that's really the critical time window before the really big damage starts happening, where important documents are being stolen or encrypted and that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
I mean, time is critical. So, I guess one thing as we, work to wrap things up here, Sophos, provides, incredible amount of security offerings for MSPs. Can you give a little bit of a background, on the comprehensive protection that, the tools that you provide that can help MSP clients?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot. Well, we've got lots of things, so we can't cover them all in the time I'm sure we have here on the podcast. But I think the most important things that we think about are, network defenses through things like our firewalls and NDR services. Of course, XDR for endpoints to detect, be able to gather all the information we need to detect and respond to incidents. And of course, now we offer our managed detection and response service to do the 24-hour monitoring and the threat hunting and that kind of thing. And I think all those things kind of go hand in hand, right? Like when you're in the midst of an incident, you want to be able to determine how it began and what happened, and you need all that logging and all that stuff in place. You need good forensic information from XDR tools in order to know what happened and be able to properly prevent a future incident from occurring. And I think there's and of course you need expert threat hunters, which are not exactly easy to find and hire these days, which is, I think, one of the reasons MDR services are becoming so popular. Is it's much more cost effective for a small organization to, we've got, I think, 23,000 customers now of our MDR service, right? So we can put like top level experts in those teams to help monitor a large scale number of them and help do advanced investigations. It's really hard to get that expertise down at the small level. But what we're missing is that middle piece, which is the really important part that managed security service providers and managed service providers play, which is, as a provider offering this service, we can't go and identify your high priority assets. We don't know your business. You know your business, and your partners know, you know your customers better than we could ever know them as to what are those critical assets and which things need the multi-factor authentication enabled, and how do we identify and go and then actually do that patching that needs to be done to those outward facing assets that are likely to be an entry point for one of these kind of crimes. We can help you do an assessment and tell you, like, here's a list of Fortinet firewalls that you have that should be patched, but we can't do anything about that. We depend on our partnership with the service providers for us to work hand in hand with them and us to be the sort of security backstop to go, when you need deep expertise, we're here, we got your back. That's Sophos' role. But then we're giving you the advice on here's all the things you need to do to be safer and more secure. And those are services that our partners offer and then deliver into those small and mid-sized customers who need those things done for them. And so I think there's very much a, we can provide you all the deep technical tools that you need to respond to the incidents, and we can provide you the expertise about the threats themselves. But then the middle piece is what our service providers are able to help us deliver that successfully to get a better outcome for the customer.
So I mean, essentially, just as an MSP is an extension of the team or the organization of an MSP client, you guys can become, Sophos can become that extension of the security team for that MSP, right? And
Absolutely.
Gives them that ability to, because let's face it, many MSPs are small. They don't necessarily have, the cybersecurity technical talent that, they ideally would like to have in-house. You essentially can provide that for them without having to have that manpower in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's back to that quick time to detect and respond and knowing what you're looking at so that you know how to respond to it. When you pick a random ransomware group, I mean, the one that's gotten the most media this year probably is Lockbit, but there's lots of them out there, Royal and Black Basta and all these different ransomware groups. Our team sees them multiple times a day because we're looking at 23,000 different environments, that we're seeing them try to attack. And, a lot of our people look at an attack of the forensic data for 20, 30 seconds. They're like, oh yeah, that's Lockbit. And the next thing they're going to do is compromise the Active Directory, because that's always what they do. Every time we see them, they do step A, step B, step C, step D. And when you know them really intimately well, you can head them off at the pass and stop the attack before it gets to the next stage. And so that's the kind of expertise that we get from our scale that we can provide. But our partners and our managed service providers are an essential part of that triage of, when do we call you in? When do we need to engage with you? And helping the customers identify when they're having an incident and that they need to engage with the experts to help be involved in that. And of course, we also offer the 24/7 monitoring so that component can be handled by us as well. But those are the types of things that, we're that security expert that you probably wish you could have on staff.
Right.
But they're expensive and hard to find, and we can provide it as a service so that it's affordable. That's the thing. I think for smaller organizations as well, it's just a matter of being able to share that resource so they don't have the burden of the high cost of hiring them.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap things up, of course, any of our audience that wants to learn more about Sophos can go to sophos.com. You can also go to everythingmsp.com and search for Sophos. We have a business profile for Sophos that includes information to be able to reach out to them directly as well. But I do want to highlight something that I hope MSPs are aware of, and if they're not, it's very important to keep in mind. that you guys don't have any minimums for MSPs. So is a, MSPs looking to buy, maybe an MDR solution, there aren't any minimums. So that's a huge benefit. And you also have an NFR program, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's well, one, it's a great way for MSPs to get experience working and comfort with the products, but hopefully it's another way they can also up their own security game and use some of those tools within their own networks to make sure that they're securing themselves as being one of those important links in the supply chain. We want our partners to be as absolutely secure as they can be, so that they're able to continue to deliver their services to their clients as well.
Yeah, and as I say over and over, just as the flight attendants go over their security in protocols and announcements, before you put you put your own mask on, your own oxygen mask on first before you assist others, because you got to take care of your own house first. It's just so critical. So, Chester, I want to thank you so much for your time and expertise today. Greatly appreciate it. Any parting words?
Not really. I mean, I think that the key is that we just have to focus on the basics, and when we are feeling like we're maybe a little underwater, just reach out for help, right? Like
Yeah.
we're here to give the information you need to help you do the things, and if you need a helping hand, we're all here to get the same job done. So don't feel overwhelmed. We'll get through this, but security is a tough slog, and we got to work together as a team.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.